Greetings, Jeff Sachs here. We're on the 39th day of the Marco Polo Drive of Peace, Culture, and Sustainable Development. And we're in the absolutely beautiful, charming, magnificent city of Suzhou in the Yangtze River Delta. Let me remind you very briefly how we have arrived here. We started in Rome. We drove from Rome to Venice in our BYD electric vehicles, and then from Venice across the Balkan Peninsula, through Slovenia, through Croatia, through Serbia, and through Bulgaria. We crossed to Istanbul, Constantinople, where we came in on the European side and departed on the Asian side, crossing the Bosporus Strait. From there, we continued east across the southern coast of the Black Sea, or the northern coast of Anatolia. We visited caravanserai sites in Samsun, in Trabzon, in Rize. We crossed from modern-day Turkey into the South Caucasus region on the eastern end of the Black Sea, in the city of Batumi in Georgia. From there, we went to the capital of Georgia, Tbilisi, met the government leaders, crossed from Tbilisi to Baku, which is on the eastern end of the South Caucasus and the western side of the Caspian Sea. We crossed the Caspian Sea into Kazakhstan, Aktau. Then we went eastward to Nukus in Uzbekistan. Then from Nukus along the oases of Khiva, Bukhara, Samarkand, those glorious oases of Central Asia. And then from Samarkand to Tashkent, Tashkent to Almaty in Kazakhstan again, crossing from Uzbekistan to Kazakhstan, and then to the northeast to the border of Kazakhstan and China, the dry port of Korgos, Korgos in the Kazakhstan side, and then crossing to Korgos on the Chinese side. From there, we went to the capital of the Xinjiang province. From Urumqi, we went to the funnel of the Heshi corridor, the east-west corridor, through which all of the land traffic coming from Central Asia and coming from South Asia would pass to get into China, because it's the corridor between two mountains, two mountain ranges. And there we were in Dunhuang. And Dunhuang is the glorious site of hundreds and hundreds of Buddhist caves carved out of the rock and painted with glorious frescoes and with great statuary of Buddha and bodhisattvas and disciples, and paintings of the wonderful patrons that paid for all of that magnificent artwork during the Tang Dynasty. And from Dunhuang, we went through the Heshi corridor, and we went to the east and then started dipping down to the south. This is significant, as I'll explain in a moment, but we arrived in Xi'an. Xi'an, a great capital city of Chinese history. In fact, the capital of the first unified kingdom of China, the Qin dynasty. There we went to see and be greeted by the thousands of terracotta soldiers, the terracotta soldiers who were made as part of the funerary monument for the emperor Qin Huangdi, Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China. And from that glorious site, of course, we continued eastward from Xi'an to another capital city, Luoyang. Luoyang is a capital of the Tang Dynasty period, and also the site of wondrous Buddhist caves and a giant Buddha whose patron was Emperor Wu Hongdi, the only woman emperor in all of China's history, a Tang Dynasty. From Luoyang, we continued in the southeast direction. Very significant, as I'll explain. And after several hours on an electric vehicle, but not an electric automobile, but an electric fast rail of China, we arrived in Suzhou, where we are today. Now, let me say at the outset that this eastward journey, this journey from Rome all the way to Suzhou, around 13,000 kilometers in total, has passed through several ecological zones, several climate zones, each one of them shaping the locale, shaping the history of the places that we visited. When we started in Rome and Venice, we were in the so-called Mediterranean climate. The Mediterranean climate is a warm, temperate climate that is distinctive in that it is very wet in the winters and dry and sunny in the summers. Great for growing grapes and olives. And so some of the greatest wines in the world come from this Mediterranean climate zone. As we crossed the Caucasus and reached into Central Asia, we arrived in both desert and steppe region. Desert is very dry, typically less than 250 millimeters of rainfall per year. Steppe region is a little bit more humid, enough to grow grass, but not enough to grow long season crops. Typically, the steppe region is around 250 millimeters to 500 millimeters of water. So when we went through Kazakhstan, we were generally in steppe region, grasslands out the windows as we sped by in our BYD electric vehicles. When we reached Uzbekistan, Khiva and Bukhara and Samarkand, we were in desert. If you looked out as we went through the highways, it was sand dunes, it was very dry, some cactus, but it was not even grassland. But of course, Khiva, Bukhara, and Samarkand exist because they are oases. They are oases in the desert climate. When we crossed back into China in Kyrgyz, we were generally varying between desert and steppe region. Very dry. These are the regions of nomadism. These are the regions where the horse was first domesticated. These are the regions where the kingdoms, like the Mongols, tended to be horse-based civilizations because the horses love the grasslands. We crossed from Dunhuang to Xi'an. That was already moving out of the desert into a more humid zone. When we reached Luoyang, that was already outside of the desert and steppe system and into the more humid areas of cultivated crops, which define the vast proportion of China's civilization and China's populations for 2.5 millennia. So we're getting into a wetter zone. Now, quite decisively, when we went from Luoyang to where we are today, Suzhou, we crossed into a really humid area. We are now in the Yangtze River Delta. It is humid, there's a lot of rainfall. This is now a rice growing region. And rice is, of course, the crop of the whole Yangtze River Basin, one of the centers of Chinese civilization. When we were in Xi'an and Luoyang to the northwest of where we are today, it was drier. It wasn't desert, but it was a place where you would grow millet, for example, which is a kind of dryland, temperate, or semi-arid, temperate, short-season crop. So we finally have reached what people think of as the center, the heartland of China, the rice-growing region of China. Now, I talk about all of this geography because it is absolutely so central to China's history. And it's wonderful. People crossing on the bridge. This is, everybody is out enjoying themselves, and I'm enjoying myself also being together with you. So don't mind the traffic, don't mind the people enjoying their way across the bridge. This is their public bridge. For me, it's quite exciting, these changes of ecology, because oases are a certain kind of history, and deserts are another kind of history, and steppelands, where the grasslands and the horses are, promote another kind of history. But now we've reached the river basins of China, and let me just mention that because it helps to explain the importance of where we are today, of Suzhou. There are two great east-west rivers. Both of them rise on the high Tibetan Plateau, far to the west of here. Then they flow from west to east, and they end up reaching the Pacific Ocean. So the great rivers of China, the two greatest rivers, the northern river is the Yellow River, the river southward of that, the Yangtze River. These are west to east flowing rivers rising in the high Tibetan Plateau, depositing or entering the ocean in the Pacific. And we are in the delta, the river delta of the Yangtze, the southern of these two rivers. The northern river, the Yellow River, is generally a wheat or millet growing region. It's a bit colder, it's a bit less precipitation. The Yangtze River is warmer and more humid, and it is the rice growing center of China. China was unified originally in the northern region, so the first kingdoms like the Qin dynasty, like the Han dynasty, which was the contemporary of the Roman Empire, these were based mostly in the Yellow River basin. Of course, there was population to the south, but the unified kingdoms of China started in the north and conquered the south. But then something absolutely wonderful happened as these two river-based parts of China came to be unified. Around the year 610 AD, one of the dynasties, the Sui dynasty of China, built a great canal that connected the Yangtze River to the south and the Yellow River to the north. And we're standing on that great canal. It's called the Jinghang Da Yun He. And what it means is Jing is Beijing. Hang is Hangzhou. It connects Beijing to the north on the Yellow River with Hangzhou on the Yangtze River. And the Da means great, and the Yun means transport, and the He means river. So it's the great river transport between Beijing and Hangzhou. It all makes perfect sense if you know the Chinese characters, and that is the Grand Canal, the great canal that connects Yangtze and the Yellow Rivers. But more than that, it connected two civilizations, the Yellow River-based civilization to the north, the Yangtze civilization to the south. There's so many things to say about this. One is that it unified in a brilliant infrastructure manner this vast Chinese civilization, which from basically time immemorial has constituted around 20% of all humanity by population. So this vast area became unified by infrastructure. Second, it exemplifies a key Chinese trait that goes back at least to Emperor Qin and even before that, and that is grandeur and scale. This is the country that builds big. It builds the Great Wall, stretching across the northern regions to try to keep the nomads from the steppe regions from invading the south. It is the place where Emperor Qin not only unified China, but then constructed a funerary site of thousands and thousands of life-size terracotta soldiers and horses and chariots because he thought big. This is the place that unified a written script with the standardized characters of the Qin dynasty that could be read by languages across this vast region of East Asia. Absolutely brilliant. This is the place that built a great canal connecting the two river systems, stretching hundreds of kilometers, with the idea that this country should be unified in transport. And this is the place, as we have driven, where we have seen thousands of kilometers of east to west connectivity of highways, fast rail, and green energy, bringing wind power and solar power and hydropower from western China towards the more populous eastern seaboard. I love it, but I would say one thing: it's unique in the world. The capacity of a society of this scale to build at scale and to constitute, therefore, 20 or 25% of the world population, of the world economy for almost 2,000 years. Wow. And it is a country that's thinking big today, as I want to turn to in a moment. But first, I also want to celebrate the fact that Marco Polo was here. And not only was Marco Polo here, but he wrote beautifully about this city. And if you'll allow me to quote just for a brief couple of minutes, he wrote, and now remember that he's dictating in the year 1298, so roughly 730 years ago. He says, Suzhou is a large and very splendid city. He's right. Its people are idolaters. It means they weren't Christians, and subject to the great Khan. He means Kublai Khan. They use paper money and have a great deal of silk. They live by trade and crafts and weave large quantities of silk fabric to make into clothes. Its merchants are rich and powerful. The city is so big that its perimeter measures 40 miles. It has such a vast population that no one could reckon on that number. And then he says if they were soldiers, they'd take over the world, but they're not soldiers. They are astute merchants and skilled practitioners of every craft. There are also magicians and diviners. Moreover, I give you my word that in this city there are no fewer than 6,000 stone bridges. And we are standing, of course, on one of the most famous bridges, the Wumen Bridge, which you see behind me. But you can look down the Great Canal and you see bridge after bridge after bridge, just like Marco Polo said. He tells you about the rhubarb and the ginger, which grows profusely in the nearby mountains. You should also know that this city presides over 16 other cities, all very large and busy centers of trade and industry. And you should know that its name, Suzhou, means in our language earth, and not far from here is another city called heaven. They were the given names as a mark of their great splendor. We will tell you later about the second of these splendid cities. So this is Marco's amazement at the beauty of this city. When he was here, the canal had already been constructed. He was here in 1270s, 1280s, but this canal dates to around 1610. As I mentioned, the Sui dynasty, which was then followed by the great Tang dynasty. So Marco Polo enjoyed the splendor. It was one of the places that when he described China to the Europeans, they couldn't believe it. And I can tell you, it would be hard to believe in 1291 how absolutely gorgeous this city is and how rich it is in its merchants and craftsmen and artisans. Well, I want to close our lectures, this 7th lecture, with the modern China, with today's China, because in the 21st century, China again is in a way fulfilling its historic place in the world. China once again has become the world's largest economy and a place that now produces around 20% of the world's output each year and has a population that is almost 20% of the world's population. China's back, and to understand that and its significance for us, in fact, how wonderful it is for the world that this is the case, let me explain how China lost its perch briefly, but now it is coming back in this role in the 21st century. You know, for most of the last 2,000 years, China was unified while Europe was at war with itself. And we talked about that in the 6th lecture. And when China was unified, that unified polity typically constituted around 20% of the world population and around 20% of the world output. And it lasted like that pretty much until the modern economic period when industrialization began. But to understand what happened then, especially in the 19th century, we have to start back just with a couple of quick thoughts. When the Mongols ruled China, which was 1271 to 1368, the Yuan dynasty, the Mongols not only controlled the vast land area of Eurasia, the largest contiguous land empire in history, but they also mastered the oceans with vast ocean-going vessels in the Indian Ocean and in the South and East China Sea, and they were the great traders. When the Yuan dynasty fell to the Ming dynasty, which was from 1368 to 1644, the Ming inherited this great ocean shipping capacity and great trade capacity, and the most famous admiral perhaps in history, Admiral Zheng He, from the years 1405 to 1433, undertook 7 great voyages throughout the Indian Ocean, reaching the east coast of Africa, trading and visiting and bringing back delicacies and animals from across East Africa and the Indian Ocean societies. But in 1433, despite this great navigational capacity, for reasons that are still debated by historians, but probably because the Ming rulers felt that the bigger risks were invaders from the north, and they wanted to devote the state resources to defense rather than to ocean-based trade, this great fleet was scrapped, and China more or less, not quite, don't want to exaggerate, but to a big extent abandoned the oceans. And then what happened? Who entered the oceans? A tiny little kingdom all the way on the other side of Eurasia, Portugal. And the king of this tiny little kingdom, King Henry the Navigator, he's called today, had grand ideas. He was going to find a way to trade with Asia that would skirt around the Muslim powers. So a Christian king was trying to find a way to Asia, and he did it by sending ships, his Portuguese vessels, down the west coast of Africa until finally they found that you could circle the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa and then use the monsoon winds to send your way up to India and into the islands of Southeast Asia. Of course, Vasco da Gama made that voyage in 1498, helped by Arab navigators who knew all about how to use the monsoons in the Indian Ocean. My point is, China abandoned the oceans, Europe took up the oceans. And in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, the Europeans not only took up the oceans, but they put cannon and other military equipment into their vessels, and they went out to create worldwide empires. And as they did that, they gained some territory in Asia, but they also conquered the Americas, which was a great boost of their power and their wealth. Part of the conquering was that they brought disease, old world disease, to the New World, and the native inhabitants of the New World had no resistance and died off when the Europeans arrived, died in vast numbers because of new diseases like plague and yellow fever and other typhus and other diseases brought by the Europeans when Columbus and the Europeans followed on in the 16th century. Well, the Europeans became the imperial powers of the world, not China. The Europeans ruled the oceans, and then with the invention of the steam engine, boom, the industrialization took off in Europe, military power soared, the capacity to project power, the capacity for violence reached industrial scale, and China was peaceful. China was prosperous, but China was not industrial. And China didn't know what was about to happen, because in 1839, the British showed up. The British showed up in the Pearl River in the south of China, and they made demands on China. And the Chinese said, no, thank you. We are China, you are Little Britain, and we don't accede to your demands. And then the British launched a war and won the war. That was the first Opium War. A very sordid tale indeed, because Britain was fighting for the freedom to sell opium to the Chinese, and the Chinese leaders thought this was not good for the public, not good for the population to be addicted to British opium, but the British were having none of it. They were the narco-traffickers of the day, and they were the industrial power, and they were going to bust China open, which they did in the first Opium War, 1839 to 1842. And that's, by the way, when Hong Kong fell into the hands of Britain as part of the prize of winning the first Opium War. Well, the second Opium War followed soon after, 1856 to 1860. This time France joined in. Following these two defeats, there was massive unrest in China, civil war. It's known as the Taiping Rebellion, but actually it was perhaps the largest civil war in world history in terms of the tens of millions of people who died internally in that conflict because of the disruptions of Chinese society. Well, it didn't stop there, because by the end of the 19th century, a new colonial power arrived to claim its imperial claims in China, and that was neighboring Japan. because Japan did begin to industrialize after 1868, after a series of reforms called the Meiji Restoration. And when Japan industrialized, they came to their neighboring country and attacked. And from 1894 to 1895, the Japanese invaded the mainland of China and fought the so-called Sino-Japanese War, or the Chinese-Japanese War, and Japan won the war. And that's when Japan began to take two colonies from China, Taiwan and Korea, both of which became effectively Japanese colonies from 1895 onward, but formally from the early years of the 20th century. So Japanese imperialism added to European imperialism. It was kind of one damn thing after another. In 1912, the Qing dynasty was overthrown in a nationalist revolution led by Sun Yat-sen, and that could have created a stable republic, but it did not. With all the external pressures and with the end of the Qing dynasty and with the revolution, what developed instead was warlords, internal struggle, and a further opening for invasion from outside. In 1931, the Japanese invaded Manchuria. In 1937, the Japanese invaded the mainland of China. And though we don't know in the West that much about these wars, the wars between Japan and China, China suffered massively in these wars. The estimate is that around 14 to 20 million Chinese died in the war against Japan from 1937 to 1945. Now then, in 1945, there was civil war between the so-called nationalists and the communists. And the communists, led by Mao Zedong, were victorious in 1949 and declared the People's Republic of China. I say all of this because that was 110 years of misery. And it's called by the Chinese the century of humiliation. And from an economic point of view, it was utterly devastating, because by the time that 110 years ended with the establishment of the People's Republic of China, China's share of world output had declined from 20% of GDP around 1840 or 1850, even more than 20% of GDP, down to less than 5% of world output, even though China's population was still 20% of the world population. China was impoverished. But how unusual, because China was impoverished really for the first time in 2,000 years, if you look to the period up to the beginning of that century of humiliation. So when we see China so successful today, what's important to understand is China is coming back to its place in the world. It's not for the first time that China becomes a world leader. China has been a world leader of technology, of the arts, of peaceful governance, of successful governance for centuries, indeed for much of the last 2,000 years. The real miracle of Chinese growth started in 1978, when perhaps the most successful economic reformer in all of world history, Deng Xiaoping, took a lesson that he saw from some of the fast-growing Asian countries, Singapore, Japan, and others, and said, we can do that too at the national scale. So Deng Xiaoping in 1978 opened up China to international trade, to ideas, to finance, after this century plus of humiliation. And China responded China's native entrepreneurship, the human energy, the social capital of people being able to work together, the large-scale visions of grand infrastructure that can connect this vast populace in this very large country of more than 9 million square kilometers took hold. And China began to grow economically at around 10% per year. When you achieve 10% per year economic growth, the economy doubles every 7 years. If you do that for 35 years, which China did, that means that you have doubled every 7 years 5 times. If you double 5 times, that is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. That is 32 times increase. And in fact, China's economy expanded more than 40 times since Deng Xiaoping said, let's open, let's go back to a market economy, let's use our Chinese know-how and our energy and our social capital. Let's build a unique Chinese economy, because it is a market economy filled with Chinese characteristics and Chinese vision, but it has succeeded. And by today, measured at international standard prices, or what's called purchasing power parity, the Chinese economy is now about 30% larger than the US economy. Of course, since China's population is 4 times larger, per person the economy remains quite a bit smaller than in the United States, but in the aggregate, the production scale is unmatched by the US or by Europe. And it's a phenomenon because it has happened within 47, 48 years. And this is what we call China's miracle. Now, part of that miracle is the following, and I'll close here as we reach the end of our tour and as we reach the story of China today. For the first 25 or so years of Deng Xiaoping's economic revolution, China was the workshop of the world. Foreign companies came to China for the very diligent workers, the talented workers, but to assemble things, to build things, usually under the specs of Western companies. But starting around 2000, China said, we need to innovate. Starting around 2010, China's innovation began to grow. In 2015, China made an innovation plan called Made in China 2025, where the government said, we can lead in many green digital technologies if we put our minds to it, if we put our research and development budgets to it, if we put our strategy to it. And now we are in 2026. We are riding Chinese electric vehicles because Chinese electric vehicles will dominate the world markets as the most cost-efficient, high-quality vehicles in the world. Everywhere we went on this trip, we saw Chinese solar modules. We saw Chinese-made wind turbines. We saw energy systems backed up by Chinese grid-scale batteries. We saw Huawei phones with Chinese-enabled 5G technologies for great digital connectivity. Indeed, China, throughout the emerging markets of the world, which constitute about 85% of the world population, is the leader in green and digital technologies today, and its innovation is soaring. And let me close by saying that Suzhou, the place where we are, is one of those phenomenal innovation clusters. Every year, the United Nations World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, makes a list of the top innovation clusters of the world. Where is innovation really happening? We know Silicon Valley, for example, is near the top of the list. But what is amazing and impressive and good for the world is that China is now a major part of that list, and indeed at the top of the list. The number one innovation cluster of the whole world today is Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Guangzhou, where we're heading as the final step of our journey just in a few days. This is the number one innovation cluster of the world. The number two innovation cluster of the world is in Japan, the Tokyo-Yokohama Innovation Cluster. The number three innovation cluster in the world is Silicon Valley in California. The number four innovation cluster in the world is Beijing. The number five innovation cluster in the world is Seoul, Korea. And the number six innovation cluster in the whole wide world is where we are now. It is the Shanghai Suzhou Innovation Cluster. So we are not only in a city of beauty for 2,500 years, a city of craftsmanship and artistry. We are not only on the great canal that connects the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. We are not only in the place that Marco Polo visited around 740 years ago. We are now today standing in one of the great innovation clusters of the world. So we are in a place that mixes great history, great culture, great cuisine, I can add, and great science and technology. It's a wonderful combination, a combination of huge benefit for the entire world.